Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the second session that Risk Evolves are running today, a series of presentations on how businesses can be more resilient through adopting various risk management principles. We recognise that compliance can be seen as possibly a little bit geeky, possibly a little bit old-fashioned. I think if we talk about health and safety compliance, we've got views of people with clipboards saying no all the time. At Risk Evolves, we try and have a little bit more of a humorous approach to a topic that I think can be perceived as being quite dull. You'll gather as we go through this is a topic we're quite passionate about. I'm delighted to be joined today by one of the team from Risk Evolves. I'm delighted to be joined by Roger Newell. Now, Roger, do you want to just quickly introduce yourselves? And I should probably just apologise to everybody as well that for some reason we can't get the webcams working. Otherwise, you get to see Roger in person. Roger, do you want to just give a quick intro?
Yes, I can just assure everybody you're not missing anything by not seeing my picture. I've been involved in ISO 9001 and all the other standards for some years, originally kicking off with BS 5750. So yes, I'm really quite old. The background for me, trained originally as a metallurgist, materials scientist, worked in the heavy industry, gas, oil, nuclear, automotive. And then I joined the wonderful Bureau Veritas as an auditor, and I've tripped my way through certification work, going back into the industrial sector for an extended period. And I'm back out now doing third-party auditing and consultancy in a range of areas. And one of the things I'll say is I always do it with keenness and enthusiasm. Hopefully that is sufficient anyway, just to introduce myself.
Yeah. So before we get started on the session, a little bit of housekeeping for you. This session is being recorded. If you're unable to attend and want to hear back what Roger and I are talking later, then there will be a webinar recording made available, and we'll put that on the website as well. I do believe as well we've got a little bit of feedback questionnaire at the end of the session. And if you want to ask us any questions as we go through, you'll find in the control panel that there is the opportunity to either just chat with us, and I've got Maniba and Debbie who are also working with me to deliver these presentations, and will help you with any questions or any problems that you may have. And if you want to ask Roger and I a question, then please feel free to do so. So what else? Okay, so if I move forward now, so who are we? What do we do? I've just given you a little bit of an insight. Risk Evolves are a management consultancy company. We believe that organisations can be very much more resilient to change and to seize opportunities, and that's through by managing risk effectively. I think from this particular session, when we talk about ISO, Risk Evolves itself has achieved some ISO certifications, and that's very much because I believe in the value of ISO certifications and other certifications as well, but also because we've got very much an ethos that we would never ask a client to do something that we ourselves wouldn't be prepared to do. So Risk Evolves has got 3 ISO standards: ISO 9001, which is quality management, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we go through; ISO 27001, which is an information security management system; and finally ISO 27701, which is around privacy information management system. So there's a lot of numbers there. So it's probably worthwhile just saying who and what ISO is. So ISO is a global organisation, and it's all around providing a number of internationally agreed specifications. So if we've done ISO 9001 in the UK, then you can pretty much guarantee that the company with ISO 9001 in the US, in India, Australia, in Japan will be operating against exactly the same standard and exactly the same principles as any other company anywhere in the globe. There are hundreds of ISO standards, aren't there, Roger? Absolutely hundreds of them. And as Roger's alluded to, Roger mentioned that he's an auditor with a company, or has been an auditor with Bureau Veritas, and now also works with a couple of other auditing companies. We also are audited to make sure that we are absolutely compliant with the standards. So it's no good Helen saying, yes, I'm good, I do 9001. We actually have some third-party independent third-party verification on that. As the slide there says, we interlock as well. ISO interlocks with a number of national organisations. So in the UK, the national organisation that ISO interlocks with is called British Standards Institute. And they work to ensure that the requirements from the countries are represented and reflected in the international standards. So why would we do a standard? I guess, Roger, they're quite big, aren't they? And they can be quite chunky for a small business, especially to to kind of adopt and endorse. Have you got any views on why
Yeah.
you think companies do ISO?
I mean, the most important thing for adopting the ISO standard and having an external certification is it gives you that qualification, which is recognized throughout the UK and in fact throughout the world. You have an independent body coming to see you, the actual auditor himself, through the UCAS system, and we'll probably talk about UCAS later. But the UCAS control, the accreditation for certification bodies, then adds the extra, I think, bonus that you really need to have in terms of producing a system that works and monitors itself and improves. And the standard is a wonderful framework which equally applies to quality, health and safety, environment, and probably a few more in the future.
Yeah.
But it's an excellent framework to run a business, and that's the key to it all.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things that all the standards have got is the concept of continuous improvement. We know that if you carry on doing today what you've always done, then you're always going to get what you've kind of always got. Every business has to evolve. Every business has to continually improve on its offerings to customers. And if we look certainly at the quality management standard, which is what this slide represents, then that evidence of continuous improvement is really strong. Now, most companies go, oh, Helen, say this is all really complicated. I don't understand where to start with ISO. One of my messages out to any organisation contemplating doing any of the ISO standards is, it is extremely unlikely that you are starting with a blank sheet of paper. You will already be doing some of the requirements of ISO within, and any of the ISO systems within your organisation. So, for example, if you are a company and you think about doing ISO 45001, which is the health and safety standard, every company by law in the UK has to comply with health and safety in the UK. So what we do there is to look for evidences that you are obviously executing great health and safety policies, and we then see where the gaps are for ISO 45001 certification. From a quality perspective, the principle of plan, do, check, act. So for the geeks among us, that's Deming. Plan, do, check, act is really simply explained as, we're going to plan what we intend to do. We're going to do what we plan to do. We're going to check that we did what we planned to do. And if we didn't do what we planned to do, we're going to act. We're going to do corrections to make sure that we don't do the same thing incorrectly again. And by doing that continuously, we will continue to improve on how we operate. So you think yourself, if you're going to do something for the first time, you're going to learn lessons on what worked and what didn't work from that first time. And if you do that activity a second time, you're going to take that learning from the first time that you did it and apply to the second time. And you will gradually continue to improve on what you do. And for us, that's very much the ethos of Risk Evolves as well. Whenever we work with clients, we want to understand what our clients' requirements are. We'll deliver to those requirements. We'll check with the client that we deliver to those requirements. And if we have a mismatch in understanding, then we'll correct that. Now, we've alluded to the fact that there are multiple standards out there, and the really great news is that a few years ago, ISO said, yeah, we get that companies don't run quality management or health and safety management or information security management in silos. We understand that organisations run many of these systems simultaneously. So how about we have some common components of the ISO systems that makes that integration a little bit easier? And that integration is called Annex SL. And what that means is that many of the standards now have a similar look and feel to them. And Roger, I don't know about you, but when we work with clients on new standards, that Annex XL, that standard structure is absolutely good news, isn't it? Brilliant news.
Yeah, I mean, to be absolutely honest, when the Annex SL came through and the harmonization for all the standards, it made it so much easier for you to do all of the standards. Fundamental controls are all in place then for things like document control, internal audit, management review, and several others. And the bolting on for each of the other standards is, in reality, quite a simple thing. You know, it's manna from heaven, you might say, but really excellent build up and a change, and the move to what was the risk-based assessment of businesses. So that's the key to it all.
Yes, and thank you for that point, Roger, because the standards now are aligned to another ISO standard, which is a guidance standard. Not all the standards from ISO are certification standards, but guidance standard from ISO 31000 is all around risk management. And what we've seen is that the certifying standards, the standards that you can certify to, have got that, again, that common look and feel around risk management. So again, think about the risk within your organisation, think about how you can manage and mitigate those risks, and how you track the actions to ensure that those risks continue to be managed and mitigated where possible. The next slide is a little bit complicated, but we're just going to take that down for a little bit, where we spoke about Plan, Do, Check, Act. We've mentioned about Annex SL, and this is what it looks like in real life, isn't it, Roger? This is the ISO 9001 quality management, yep. But pretty much the same for the other standards, isn't it?
It is. It's identical, and really, when you look at all of this, it's a bit sort of mind-boggling. And I know, having been a quality manager as well, you tend to get everything dropped onto you. Oh, I can't understand this. I can't really read this. You know all about it. But as soon as you translate it into other things, it means you need to explain things. It means you have to have job descriptions. You need to communicate. And as you steadily work down it, you can see you need fundamental documents in place. I don't know whether you're going to take any more detail out of that, Helen, but
I will,
you know, things like quality policy, yes, they're a document, but ultimately, how do you actually communicate to that staff? Do they really know about it? Okay.
Yeah, and one of the other things I'll call out on this particular one as well, Roger, is around third parties as well. This was another big change that actually came in the quality management standard, wasn't it? The ISO organisation recognises that we no longer operate as complete islands. So each of the standards will have a focus as well on what your supply chain is doing, and that's another big change. And again, each of us, regardless of whether or not we operate to an ISO standard, when we operate within our organisations on a day-to-day basis, we will obviously have an understanding of what our suppliers are doing with us and for us. That's a key component now of every single ISO standard, isn't it, Roger, that's got the Annex SL?
Yeah, not forgetting the specific use of subcontractors, and it's how you instruct your subcontractors to do the work, ensuring that they are complying with the regulations, any rules that are in place, collecting all the requirements of contract. It's the handling of the information when you take it up as a contract, passing it on to subcontractors so they know exactly what they are doing, and ensuring throughout that you're being legally compliant in all things you're doing. It's yeah, very, very well created.
Absolutely. So if we again drop that down to another level of detail, policies, objectives and procedures, what on earth are they, Roger? And for me, the great step that ISO did back in 2018 with the 2015, beg your pardon, with the new quality management standard, especially, they reduced the amount of paper. Oh, what a blessing that has been.
Yeah, I think that the ability now to use electronic records, you know, is in itself excellent. You can show control of your procedures through SharePoint, for example, through Dropbox. The nature of a change of a document is easily recognized. And this used to be such a time-consuming exercise, I think, in the past, and people would get in a right mess, I think, in working out how to do what revision level, do we have to change this, how do we have to notify people, and this can be done at a stroke now in so many ways. It's a big improvement, massive.
It's much easier to adopt, isn't it? So whereas, and you're right, Roger, I can also remember BS 5750. That used to be half of rainforest, didn't it? Chopped down in paper. It used to be so paper heavy.
Yeah, keeping copies of controlled documents around 13 sites, having to visit them, having to make sure that the managers are updating them, because what's the last thing you want to do in any great big thick manual? I've got a pile of revisions here, let's leave them to gather dust until, oh, the auditor's coming, better do it now.
Yes, and we've both been to organisations, Roger, in the past, I'm sure, where instead of the fire extinguisher propping open the door, it would also always be the quality manual propping open the door, wouldn't it? But
Yes.
no, and it also means as well that where perhaps you've got CRM systems in place and pipeline management systems in place and ERP, MRP systems in place, you don't document what's in those systems because those systems are by their very nature self-documenting. You know, you go through certain gates in order to move through stages. And for me, that's been a massive improvement by the ISO organisation. There is still a requirement, isn't there, Roger? I think it's really important to say there is still a requirement for specific records.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you clearly have to keep specific information from what the client originally requests, proof if you've got changes. But the software of the ERP systems is brilliant for this because you end up with a chain where you've made notes. You have fixed prices. You can show all the design modifications, all of them linked together to provide the trail and the traceability that all these standards require.
So it's a lot easier to achieve, I think, Roger, isn't it? In terms, in my opinion, it's a lot easier to achieve ISOs today than it possibly was, I don't know, 10
I
years
think so.
ago.
I'd agree. Yeah, fully.
And when we look at some of the key points there, policies and objectives, most organisations will have policies related to certain things. They'll have policies that support their strategic direction. They're going to have objectives that support and understand whether or not they're achieving their strategic directions. And inevitably, they are going to have some processes and procedures around how they achieve that. And our task as auditors, as consultants, is to tease that out of organisations, isn't it, into a form that ISO expect to see in regard to whichever standard we're applying for. Right, management review and audit, Roger, because I know that when people think about management review and audit, they think pain. The word audit especially puts fear into people, doesn't it, and makes strong men turn to jelly. That's not at all what we see, is it? In ISO, it's very different from a management review and audit perspective.
Yeah, I think that most firms are used to having people check their systems. It's really you need to get into this habit of knowing that your management review is looking at the whole of the system. It's looking at the feedback of information, knowing you're collecting the right information, and nearly every managing director wants to know he's doing that. And that perhaps that setting of the KPIs, we just need to align them, make sure we're recording what we're doing and looking for those improvements. And the audits will then steadily check that you have all those processes in place and you're getting the right sort of information. Communication is key in all of these things.
Absolutely, and we have two types of audit, don't we, as well, Roger, with the ISO system. Do you want to just touch on what's the difference between an internal audit and an external audit?
Right. Well, for the internal audit, you are looking at your own management processes and procedures fundamentally, but you are cross-checking them against what the standard requires. And so as you look around, you know the detail and you should be doing a better job looking at what you know should be in place. When you have the external auditor come to visit you, he will look that you have a system that checks it correctly. He won't always have the depth of knowledge of looking at what you do as an individual company. However, I will say that under UCAS, you do have to have an auditor who has what the correct codes for the sector you're in. So the external auditor will look at how you internally audit, will have a knowledge of how and where the points are within the sector you're involved in, and he'll check that you're doing a good job to look at the whole and all parts of the standard itself. So it's compliance with the standard for a third-party certification body, and it's the internal audit which will look at the workings of the business and compliance in its own way, and it's the balance of those two which will then get you certification.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, we work with a number of different organisations and we help them deliver their own internal audit, and we also lead the process as well, don't we, with external audit. So we'll, holding hands is a bit derogatory, don't mean that at all, but we'll guide a client through the internal audit process and the external audit process. So just take some of that fear out of them. In terms of external audits, I think this is really key, Roger, in terms of what is it the external auditor is going to expect to see and hear. I remember when I did my auditor training, I was told to use all 5 senses with an auditor as an auditor. Never quite got to do the taste one. I guess the closest to taste is around the coffee, the quality of the coffee, perhaps. Smell, not sure.
Yes. I like the list. I've always liked this list, and the strength of any auditor is, funnily enough, is listening. It's you provide the open questions, and then you sit back and listen, and then you try and pick up on the things that maybe don't quite get together, or there's a gap. And I think that even the businesses themselves are quite surprised at what an external auditor does pick up, but it's having that independent viewpoint, I think, that really provides the benefit, and they can go and talk to everybody to the best of their ability. There's only limited time, but this, yes, seeing things, hearing, listening, looking at leadership, communications, you do it through being there, talking, listening, and generally rooting around.
Absolutely. And I see that the tone from the top there, Steve, on the previous call also mentioned the tune in the middle as well. It's around making sure that the tone from the top is cascaded through the organisation as well, isn't it, Roger? It's not just what the boss says, it's how does it actually look like in operation.
Yeah, you want full support. You don't want saying, if you don't do this, you're going to be sacked. And I have had a few third-party audits where I've been in, and an employee says, if I don't get this right, the manager or the director said he may sack me, or he may discipline me. And I said, well, that's a nonsense. You just tell me what you do. Just explain how you do it. And you want support. You don't want to blame culture. And there's so many good examples I've met where leadership is really just excellent. They know the team, they provide the resources, and occasionally, yes, you find lapses and they don't perhaps fully provide their things. But when we have the external audit, we can prompt them. We can say, look, you need to do this. It's evident that maybe the staff don't fully understand and can't see the commitment. And that's a big word, commitment.
Yes. Yes, I completely agree with that one, Roger, because I think I'm going to say this slightly flippantly, perhaps it's easy to achieve certification, isn't it? Sometimes the tough bit is actually retaining that certification, the ongoing projects to ensure that you are embedding and continuing to improve on the original implementation.
Yes, the habit is that you'll do the initial work and then you'll leave it go with a big sigh. You've all had a good push, you pass, and then 3 months, 4 months, 5 months pass by, and you don't really look at perhaps the data you should have been collecting. You're not recording your non-conformances. The key to this is always just stay on top of the game. Just have a look every month. Pop in, have a look at your objectives, have a look at your non-conformances. Are people filling in forms? And you'll be doing that anyway. If you think of something as simple as health and safety inspections on sites, are people filling them in correctly? Are they acting on them? What are the accident rates like? That's tripped a little bit into the health and safety side of things, but it applies equally to manufacturing or administration. How many complaints are you getting?
Yeah, I think that's a good point as well, Roger, around the customer feedback. If we look at ISO 9001, which is very much looking at client feedback and customer feedback, then listening to and again receiving feedback on what you're doing and responding, reacting to that feedback in a hopefully a positive way is again something that the auditors will expect to see and hear.
Feedback wise, I have a number of occasions when people say, well, we don't have a lot of feedback. And I'll always say to them, well, what about your sales team? They talk to people every day. What about the, sort of people who are doing the deliveries? They'll be saying, oh, great job, well done. Thank you for delivering on time. Thank you for getting it here when we ask for you a special, special request. Note it down, pass it on. It's recognizing good practices. So quite often you may not get many complaints, but you might fail sometimes to not really just record, oh, we are doing that thing very well. And individuals will suddenly hit you, in the face. They're very good at their jobs, lots of good comments coming about them, and maybe we can promote that person. That's the thing.
And actually, that's a really good point as well, Roger, because I also look for internal improvements. I think as businesses, we're really great at focusing perhaps on what's not gone quite so well, but we don't stand back and celebrate our internal successes. So it could be that we just recruited somebody, or somebody's achieved some certifications, being on a particular course, or the business has improved from a profitability perspective, or we've just delivered a different piece of work. We don't stand back sometimes and celebrate some of those successes, which again is actually very much at the heart as well, isn't it, of all the ISO systems.
Yeah, definitely. People enjoy and appreciate being valued. I mean, that's good management, isn't it? You know,
Mhm.
it's true everywhere. I want to hear somebody saying you're doing a good job. I don't want, why haven't you done that, or you're late with that all the time. And that just that taking notice and perhaps appearing out of normal hours, looking at another shift, appearing on a night shift, thanking somebody, brilliant stuff. Just yeah, it shows your commitment from the top.
Definitely. So we've almost at the bottom of the half hour. We'll obviously open up to any questions that anybody may have. You've probably noticed that Roger and I are both quite passionate about the value of standards within a business, just so we're waiting for some questions to come through. I would say definitely do it. I think there's one of the things we didn't touch on, the reasons why. I guess, Roger, you do standards. You know, that I think from my perspective, I see two reasons. One is it absolutely has helped us run a really strong risk and governance system for Risk Evolves. But for Risk Evolves as well, it's also helped us get into a very different supply chains, and it's actually made us more competitive in the marketplace because we have the standards that we're talking to customers about, and we are able to potentially bypass some of those horrific supply chain questionnaires that you may receive because we've got the standards. So for us, it's an investment well made. What
Well,
other
I
views
was
have you got?
I was going to say my other thing is that when the questionnaires for the larger sort of like assessment things like Safe Contractor and Achilles and things, you have the documents ready to just give to them, and it means you aren't excluded from some of the larger sort of contracts where otherwise, if you didn't have maybe 9001 and you couldn't fill in these forms, you would not be able to tender, and that's a big loss to your potential revenue stream always.
Yeah.
But
So we just had a question come in, Roger. Is ISO only for the big corporates?
no, not at all. I've done businesses to size people, you know, little tiny
Mm,
carpentry company. It works from top to bottom, and really they have to have it because they actually do work for the county council, and
yeah,
without it they can't. And it fits. You have a system that suits you. It doesn't have to be complicated. It can be fit and built to meet the needs of the business, and that's the whole point.
absolutely, absolutely. And on a similar vein, you know, one of our other clients is a 3-person software as a service company, which has got a number of ISO standards. So not just one, but they've actually got 4 different ISO standards. So it's really, really great for them. Really, really great for them.
I
Does
think
the cost of standards put some small companies off as it's a big investment in time and money? This is a great question. Any thoughts on this one, Roger?
the cost, there is a cost to it. Quite
Mm,
often it's more to do with the time that needs to be involved, but you can spread it amongst people. And if you think again, what we've said, that you can have it for a 2 or 3-person business, you know the cost need not be excessive. The cost can be offset by your benefits. You may have a better business as a result of it. You may win contracts which are slightly better for your needs. It also may prevent you making a mistake in which you may potentially be at risk through prosecution in some way, shape, or form. So yes, you can do it. You doesn't have to be for a lot of money, but there will be a certain cost to it, but you should be able to offset it. That's the whole point.
yeah, I completely agree. The cost, and funny enough, this is a conversation I have with all the certification bodies on a regular basis, is that sometimes that cost can be quite a large amount of money. You know, if you're looking at doing 3 or 4 standards, that's going to be 3 or 4 days of audit time. You know, that is an external cost to the business. I would add that because the standards organisations, so the likes of NQA, BSI, Lloyd's, BAB, who we work with quite regularly, they've all got plans in place now as well to help companies spread the cost of some of this, to make it more accessible to small companies. They're not daft. They recognise that small companies are going to be asked to adopt these through supply chain. So they are trying to make it absolutely easier to do. We've also got another question coming round as well regarding internal auditor training and writing some templates and auditing resources. So Roger, what would you recommend from an internal auditor training perspective?
It's always going to be beneficial to you to try and get an external course if you can. There is a cost to the course, and you do lose a member of staff for at least 1 or 2 days. but it provides a better viewpoint. If you can get someone into a bigger company, perhaps to teach half a dozen of you at a time, that's a very cost-effective method. But when push comes to shove, if you have only got one person who's trained in the organization and you cascade that through doing your own in-house internal auditor training, that can be quite acceptable as long as they do a good enough job, and the proof is in the reports. It is possible to do that, but if you can do an external course to start, I'd suggest.
And actually, it's a really good point, Roger, because one of our other clients, a slightly larger clients, this has got about 100 people in the organisation. One of the things they did for their new starters was they asked their new starters to become internal auditors as well. And they did that for two reasons. One, it gave them a really great insight into how the organisation worked. But there is massive value in somebody going, how does that work? Why do you do that? So yeah, they found that very useful. Another question from Stuart: how do you refuse requests for more documentation from supply chain partners in a nice way when excessive and confidential? Yeah, that's a really great question there. And certainly if you get into the information security world, we've had requests from which we've responded to on behalf of customers for things like network maps. The answer is you do not provide that. There are ways that you can do it. You're rightly saying a nice way. It's around, no, that is compromising business confidential information. No, we would see that as a potential security exposure, certainly if you're going to provide network diagrams and so on and so forth. But Stuart, very happy to pick that conversation up with you offline, because you're absolutely right. It is something that we help clients with on, unfortunately, quite a regular basis. One of the questions that we would always go back to the customer on is, what is the risk that you're trying to manage? Let's see whether we can help you manage that risk in a slightly different way from us giving you loads of information. So I think we've just about run out of time there, haven't we? Really busy session. Thank you very much, everybody. There is a copy of the presentation in the handout section. When we close the call, you should receive a really short questionnaire. We love feedback. We are an ISO organisation, and believe it or not, an ISO certified organisation. Part of these sessions is part of the reason and how mechanism rather of how we gather feedback. So please tell us what you liked, and equally tell us where you think we can improve. So thanks very much. Hopefully I'll see everybody on the next call at midday, which is all around environmental, social and governance. But in the meantime, thank you very much for attending.